From the west coast of British Columbia to you listening around the world and blasting out into the universe, welcome to tonight's edition of Space Dot Radio.
We were going to have problems getting a hotel in Prescott because they were having bicycle races that weekend. But I called the Hotel Vendome, which is supposedly one of the haunted areas, and the guy told me that he still had a couple of rooms left. I immediately booked it. Their room there at the Hotel Vendome that supposedly has activity is room 16. And when we got in there, they have the old style keys still. So he had the owner had like a wicker basket, and our key was in the basket. I had told I'd reserved number 19, and 16 was there. And I said I thought that room was non-rentable, or you rented it at a cost. He goes, no. He goes, it's not non-rentable, and we don't charge extra. It's just that you have to ask it for it on a request. He goes, we don't like people leaving in the middle of the night and then trying to get their money back. We're not going to do that. He asked me, do you want it? And I said, well, we just came off a couple of hunts. I'm about hunted out for the moment. So we took 19 down the hall and across from room 16, a distance of maybe 30 feet or so. Right next to room 16 is the stairway that goes down to the lobby, and then proceeding further up the hall, we're the next door up, and just across the hall from it. So probably about 30 feet. Towards the end of the evening now, it's starting to get dusk. It's April. It's cool. Hasn't become the hot time of the year yet. Jan jumps in the shower because we're going to go down to Whiskey Row and get something to eat. And she asked me, are you ready? I said, well, I need to get a coat out of the car. And she said, well, go down and get it. By the time you get back, I'll be out of the shower. Again, the old keys, all right? I step out of room 19, and I lock the door. I have to turn and face the door in order to lock it, unlike the new digital keys where you just slam it and it just automatically locks. I actually have to lock it with a brass key. And as I'm doing that, suddenly motion is caught out of the corner of my eye, and I see this cowboy step out from room 16. I can't see the door because of the angle that I'm at, but I see him step out from room 16. And he looks to me like he's drunk, because at first he moves real quick. Then he kind of slows down. Then he almost falls down, and he almost touches the floor trying to right himself, but then he manages to right himself back up, which definitely catches my eye at that time, because I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, oh, they rented the haunted room to a drunk cowboy. I wonder if this guy knows that he's staying in a supposedly haunted room. He doesn't look at me. He goes ahead and starts proceeding down the hallway to where there is a second floor smoking balcony that has French doors. One French door is open. The screen is there. The other French door is closed. The balcony is second story up. We measured it later on. From bottom to the top of the balcony is right about 14 feet. So it's like 10 feet to the bottom of the roof there where it starts, and then the overhang itself is maybe 2 feet thick. And there's no way down. There's no stairs going down. There's no way to get off of the balcony. There's two windows from the two adjoining rooms that face it. They're both nailed shut for security reasons from the outside. The only way down is to jump or to come back into the hotel and go down the stairs. He goes to the end, and he stands in front of the screen door. And there's some antiques in the hallway, and I wanted to take a picture of the antiques, but I didn't want this guy in my picture. I thought he was a tourist. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to wait for him to leave, and I'll take some pictures. He doesn't leave. He stands there at the door. Long time. Okay, now I'm talking, I want to say a minute and a half to 2 minutes he's standing there, and I'm thinking to myself, why don't you go out? What's wrong with you? There's nothing to see out there. Why don't you go? Now I'm getting mad. I'm like, no, I'm not going to let this guy force me to go without getting my pictures. I'm like, go out. I'm thinking to myself mentally, go out, do something, go out, okay? So when he finally does go out, I don't see him open the door. And even though it's fairly dark down there because it's dark outside and they have dim lit inside of the hallway, I don't see him open the door. And the screen door screeches when you open it, as most screen doors do, and I don't hear any noise. I'm like, how did he do that? How did he get out there without making the noise? Because I'd been out there a couple of times already, and you can't get by opening the door without the noise. He goes out to the balcony. And now I'm looking through, from my vantage point, is like I've moved towards him. I'm like right next to the door to room 16, which is now shut. And I'm looking through the glass door of the second French door that's there, fairly large window pane. And as I'm watching him, he walks to the edge of the balcony, and then he seems, because he's getting smaller and smaller to have basically moved off into space. And I'm watching this, and I'm like, I don't understand. I'm still stuck there. I was thinking, trying to rationalize this. Now, right below that balcony is the Hotel Vendome sign. And the Vendome sign is a neon sign, and it's red. And as he appears to go into space, his entire body, from what I can see of at that time, from about the rear end of his trousers on up, turns a very bright red, the same color of the neon sign. And then about 2 seconds later, bam, he vanishes. So, and then there's an American flag there, which kind of fluttered into my view, and I thought, what did I just see? And I thought, well, I better go out and ask this guy how he managed to do that. And of course, I went out to the porch, found that there is no one on the porch except for me. I'm thinking maybe this guy took a header over the balcony, and I judged him to be older than myself, so I know he's not gonna do the heave ho and jump over it. He'd definitely at 14 feet, he'd definitely break his legs. So I walk around the balcony with my camera, using the flash of it, photographing the ground, especially areas where it's kind of dark, to see if he's laying down there somewhere. And then I'm thinking that maybe I ought to tell somebody in the room. I turn to look, and I see through the glass window that's in room 16 that faces that balcony. The curtain's very thin, and I can see a couple sitting in there, the silhouette of them. And then the guy takes a flash photo of a young girl, and when he does, it illuminates the room, and I can definitely see him sitting there. So I think I'm going to go knock on the door and see if anybody's with him, but maybe Grandpa fell over the balcony. So I walk back in to get ready to knock on the door, and just as I raise my fist to knock on it, the girl opens the door, and they both step out, and I ask them, you're staying in room 16. I said, do you know the history of it? And they said, yes, we do. And I said, I have to ask you, are you alone? Do you have anybody else staying with you? And they said, no, we checked in alone. And then I proceeded to tell them the story of this cowboy, but I didn't say that I saw him walk out of their room. I thought that would be too much for him. I just told them that I saw him walk down the hallway and basically disappear over the railing. And the girl was like, she says something like, I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to stay here. And points to her boyfriend. He made me do it. The next morning, I asked the manager, and they had checked out sometime during the night. They were gone by the time that he got to work in the morning. So I don't know. Maybe they checked out right after that. Hard to say. I think he did say that they left him a note saying that they'd slept well. So apparently maybe that didn't have anything to do with it. So right after the occurrence, okay, now this is what you're talking about. I'm elated, I'm happy, at the same time I'm confused, and I'm scared. So naturally, I'd want to tell somebody. I run down to the front desk. The manager at that time was the owner. I think it was one of the Langsfords, owned the hotel at that time. And I tell him exactly what it was that I saw, and he doesn't even look up from his book. He's doing some book work. He doesn't even look up. He goes, oh yeah. He goes, that's Tom Mix. He goes, he's the other ghost here. People see him all the time. Doesn't even look up. I'm like, oh, okay. So then I go back to my room. By then, my wife's out of the shower, and I walk in, and I hurriedly tell her what happened, and her response to me is something like, that's nice, dear. That's nice, dear. I'm glad you got to see what you came for. Did you get your coat? So I mean, those are the responses that you can pretty much expect to receive when you tell people about occurrences that you've had. Now, to get on with that, what I was saying about the Vendome, after I couldn't find anybody that really believed me, we took off. We came back to Las Vegas. Within about a week of returning, my wife changed her mind when she found that I had spent about $5,000 on equipment. I built our first surveillance unit inside of a suitcase with 16 banks of wireless cameras. We tested them on site in Virginia City, Nevada. The most important thing that we caught during our first hunt using the surveillance at Virginia City was not a ghost, but it was an armed robber. Guy had just robbed a place, and I found him messing around with my equipment. Turned the footage over to Story County Sheriff's Department, and it helped in his apprehension. That's part of the problems with going into these old structures, is that bad guys like to hang out in old structures also. And I always tell people, what's more frightening, if you're going into an abandoned building, coming around a corner and finding yourself face-to-face with an apparition, or coming around a corner and finding yourself face-to-face with an active meth lab. So anyway, what happened down there, the thing that was most important when we did the hunt at Virginia City, we did some other hunts. We went to the Miners Hospital, and at the Miners Hospital, I took a picture with the Canon with the still camera outside in the yard, very large yard for this miners' hospital. And in the lower part of that picture was a little streak of what looked like a scratch. Except when I first looked at the viewfinder, it's like someone scratched a negative. But of course, with digital, you don't have negatives. So you can enlarge it on the camera by little knobs and buttons and things like that. And I zoomed in on it, and basically it looked like a little string of lights. You can see 3 lights on it, shining out from it, and it's hovering about a foot above the grass, and it is casting a shadow onto the grass. Now, this is what really started me to looking into science and investigating it, because I had always thought that when we're talking ghosts, we're talking energy fields. Energy fields don't cast shadows. Only mass casts a shadow. So this was something that I captured that cast a shadow, and there wasn't supposed to be a shadow there. If that shadow hadn't been there, I'd have showed it around as just a curiosity. But that one pic was enough to launch me into the spectrum that I now study. We began to do our usual hunts. We did the Hotel Vendome. I went down there for a second time with a guy, another investigator, wanted to be an investigator, was a former ranger, just came out of Iraq, told me he wasn't afraid of anything. He volunteered to sleep in a room. We rented 3 rooms there, 16, 17, and 19. I set up surveillance equipment in room 19, ran the wireless surveillance into room 16 where he was sleeping. Some minor things happened. I picked up the sound of a doorknob being turned. There was something that sounded like it was scratching inside of the wall of room 19, room 17 where I was at, and those walls are solid brick. So I know that wasn't going on. I turned off the surveillance at 5 o'clock because I was afraid it might overheat. At 5:30, he told me later on that somebody cocked a weapon near his ear. He had just come out of Iraq. He knows what a weapon sounds like. He says unmistakable sound of a weapon being cocked. He came up right out of the bed. He said he got dressed. He left the room. Later on, he told me that he would not go back and do another hunt with me. Okay, so I studied Langmuir's works. I arrived at this application. It's not a popular application, and you'll see why in a little bit. All right, but this is, of course, and this is just my viewpoint. But you can do exactly what I did. You can go in, you can read, and you can backtrace all the mathematics and the physics involved in it, and see that what I'm telling you is exactly what it is. Okay. Before going into the applications that I'm going to discuss, you have to have a layman's comprehension of another of Langmuir's studies. Okay. This is the one that earned him the Nobel Prize for surface chemistry, and that is the study of adsorption. Okay. This is different from absorption. Okay, it uses a D rather than a B. And I'm going to give you a layman's definition. It's not a scientific explanation of how it works, but it's meant to form an image in your mind of what it is that I'm talking about. So with the property of adsorption, let's say that I have a glass pitcher, and I fill it with water, and I want to make iced tea. So I put the tea in, powder, whatever it is, and I swirl it around, and as I'm sitting at the table where this pitcher's at, and I look through that glass pitcher, I can see that now it is a pitcher of tea. When I stand up and look down into the pitcher, where I would be looking at the substance, I can see that it's full of tea. That's the property of absorption. Okay, the tea mixture, the powder, has basically absorbed completely into the solution. All right. Now, the property of adsorption with a D, and it comes close to what you would think of as adhesive. It basically means to cling to. After I stir the product up, after I stir the mixture of this powder up to make iced tea, and I'm sitting at the table and I look through the glass, I can see that it looks like iced tea through the glass. But when I stand up and look down into the product itself, it looks like water. I dip my finger in it and I taste it, and it is water. But again, when I back down and I look through it, I can see that it's not water, it's tea. Okay, what has happened is that the powder, once it has been dissolved, has adhered or adsorbed to the inside of the pitcher one molecule or one atom in strength completely around the inside of this pitcher, and it's basically stuck there. This is the same principle that's used and which later people took his work to come up with fluorescent lighting. Okay, they take a mercury vapor that's charged with electricity, and they coat the inside of the fluorescent tube with phosphorus that is 1 molecule thick. The arc that's running through the mercury vapor excites the phosphorus and gives us fluorescent lighting. That layman's example, like I say, it doesn't necessarily work. I mean, it's not scientifically based. If there's anybody out there that's in physics, you're like, well, this guy, you don't know what he's talking about. No, I meant to try to form an image in your mind of what the property of adsorption is. It basically means to cling to. It means that it has formed a molecule, it has formed a substance that's only a molecule in thickness on whatever it is. Usually it takes an electrical discharge of some kind to do that. Okay, now the study that's always overlooked, that is in regards to Langmuir's wave, because everybody hits on plasma. They know that it came from Langmuir. They always study that, the effects of plasma, the effects of the ionized gas, was his studies of plasma relating to light, what's called transmissivity, okay, light transmission, okay. Langmuir and Tonks found out that when this container of electrically charged plasma was hit with a light source. Now remember, the container still has this electrical field, which is causing the ions and the electrons to separate. When it's hit with a light source, and the frequency of that light is below that of the oscillating frequency of that plasma in the test sample, the light reflects off of the sample. When the frequency of light is higher than the frequency that's within the sample, the light is transmitted, which means that it passes through the sample as though the sample is a piece of glass or clear water. Now, we consider the folks that run these plasma websites, I believe that they are correct. There is an apparition, a self-contained plasma field, just as they say it is. It's contained within a magnetic layer, which is how they do it in the studies today, is they don't actually use a containment tube. They contain plasma within a magnetic field. And the oscillating frequency of that plasma is lower than the frequency of light hitting it, then the light's transmitted through the sample, and you won't see it. Now, again, for a layman's terms, and by the way, Langmuir not only did this with plasma, he didn't do it with gas, he also did it with metals. He did it with, he would run a frequency response, an electrical response across certain metals, and specifically named was gold, copper, and silver, I believe were the three that he used. And he found that the results were exactly the same, although, of course, you have to reach a higher period of frequency oscillation for something that's solid matter than something that is in a gaseous form. So now let's get back with our layman's example of, again, okay, not really scientific, but to get you to understand what it is. Let's say you have and again, we use the metal for this, okay, as Langmuir did studies with oscillating frequencies in metal. You have a metal slab in front of you, okay, and you're going to oscillate a frequency across it. As the sample rises and comes close to the frequency of light, okay, if the frequency is below that of the light will go through it. Okay, that's what we just learned. If the frequency of that's oscillating across that metal rises up, then as it comes close to the frequency of light that's hitting it, it will start to come into focus. So it will appear, first of all, as though it's a ghost image, and then it will become stronger and stronger and stronger as the frequency rises and the light becomes subordinate to it. Depending upon the type of ionization that's going on in the substance, it's quite possible that perhaps as the frequency rises, some parts of frequency don't rise as much as others. Perhaps if you were looking at an image of a humanoid, perhaps he's a humanoid and doesn't have a head. Or maybe his legs are disappeared from the waist down because the frequency hasn't fully realized yet. As that frequency rises higher and gets completely above the frequency of light that's hitting it, then that frequency will appear as a solid object. It would appear as a solid piece of metal. Now, going back to what I said before, if we drop that frequency back down so that the light source is above the frequency that's resonating, and when we did metals, when he did studies with metals, he had to really put these metals through rigor, so it's not like he could just go ahead and run an electrical charge against it. Most of the light source had to be way up into the UV range in order to penetrate the sample. But when it was lower than that, you would basically, when the light hit it, you'd basically see a metal. Like if we were using a block of gold, you'd see gold. And not only would you see gold, but you'd see the light like a flashlight reflecting back to you. Okay, as you reach the point where the transmission of light going into the UV range is higher than the oscillating frequency of that metal, Now you won't see anything being there other than perhaps just an outline, because the light is passing through it completely. And if you were on the other side of the metal, looking through that solid piece of metal, you would see the light shining at you through that solid piece of object, that solid object. Although it sounds incredulous, it's not incredulous at all. This is what the study showed. This is what he researched. And a lot of this, like I say, he got the Nobel Prize for. And if you think about higher frequencies of light, as we go into gamma and X-ray, they pass through anything solid. They'll pass through your body. The stuff that they're using at the airport, I don't know what it is that they use to look at your body with to determine if you've got explosives or, I don't know, the angle of the dangle, whatever it is the hell they're looking for. Okay, is another frequency of light that basically does the same thing. Light is fantastic when you get into the studies of it. Now you can see the problems with presenting this theory is that it basically says that if Langmuir's correct and we look at back engineering it, that in order to see something, it's saying that the frequency has to be lower. It's a clear indication that whatever is being photographed that you can't see but you're picking up on equipment as far as EMF fields, things like that, is in a frequency which is way down into the infrared, probably into the microwave spectrum. And that as it rises up, any light source that is subordinate to it is going to be able to see it. That goes from infrared to broad spectrum all the way up into UV. As it increases its strength, any light source that is subordinate to it is going to bounce off or reflect from it. So what this means is that the UV stuff that paranormal sites are selling isn't effective. Now let's fit the parameters of science, as I explained it to you, into that sighting. Okay, I stepped out of room 19. I turned to close the door. As I do, I see in the corner of my eye a cowboy moves quickly and then slowly out through the doorway. I cannot see the doorway, but it turns out the doorway is closed. He's walking through a solid object. He almost hits the floor. I assume he's drunk. He tries to balance himself from the floor. The reason that he has to move quick and then slow down is not because he's intoxicated and it's the image of an intoxicated cowboy, but because he has mass. Just like that mass that I photographed of that plasma streamer at the hospital yard in Virginia City. The mass is different than our mass, but it has a certain amount of mass. And when you have mass going through mass, it causes frictional drag. I went back and looked at all of the stories that I could find of people that had seen full-bodied apparitions, and almost to the T, every one of them says he was moving very quickly, or when he hit something solid, he tended to slow down. In fact, Alan Pacheco, there in New Mexico, was the one that referred you to get in contact with me, has told me that they have sightings there of an old-time Spanish monk of some kind, and as he walks through solid walls, which people have seen all the time, they always report that his hair gets stuck. That's because of mass. It's not an electrical field. It's a mass, okay? Now he's walking down the hallway. All right, he comes to the other door. He hesitates. Again, I can't tell what he's doing, but he's moving very slowly through that door. As he finally reaches the porch, he has the appearance of moving out into plain air, which he probably does, and then turns a very bright red, the same color of the plasma light, the neon light, which is directly in front of him. Now, light reflects off of materials differently. This is what caught my eye. If you and I were to go there and we were to shine the same neon light on us, we would look red, but it would be red in different hues. If we had on a dark shirt, it would be a very dark kind of red. We're Caucasian men. It would show very bright on our face. If we were African American, it would hardly show on the face except for a reddish hue. I mean, it goes by the pigmentation that's reflecting off of and the materials it's reflecting off of. In this case, though, his entire body, his entire substance turns the same color of red all over at the same time. That demonstrates the property of adsorption. There is a molecule which is going around the outside of that magnetic field that's encompassing the plasma. And for some way, maybe from the inside, it's able to project an image onto the outside of that. And that image was geared towards the broad spectrum light in the hallway. When it went out and went past that and got into contact with the light that was out there, with the neon light, now that's a different frequency of light. And because it was not attuned to that, it had no way to prevent reflecting the entire frequency of light. back to an observer that was watching it. So we have both principles of Langmuir's wave shown there in that one sighting. And also, the explanation as far as dropping and raising the frequency explains why you see partial apparitions, explains why you don't see apparitions but collect other activity, why apparitions can disappear. All they have to do is lower their frequency, and the light that you're seeing them, broad spectrum or infrared, which is what you're using, goes right through them. They become passive as far as transmissivity, and you don't no longer comprehend that there's there. If you look at some of the videos that we've done, you'll see in the videos a lot of times I'm asking whatever is there to try to please raise its vibration, raise its frequency, so that we can see it. We can see our light will bounce off of it so that we can see what it is.